Ben is good.
Okay, Ben is good. For status, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. I'm a New York City-based filmmaker. I work for the last 20 or so years mostly as a cinematographer, but on documentary work is the work I've enjoyed the most. And I had wanted to direct my own documentary for quite a long time. And this movie, Changing Lanes, is when I finally got to do it, largely because the pandemic really slowed down my normal work. So I finally had time to do something of my own.
Okay, your work sits at the intersection of film and urbanism, design, and public life. What first attracted you to the story behind Changing Lanes?
Well, I've been passionate about cycling for my whole life. I used to race bikes. Now I use bikes to as transportation. Like most New Yorkers, I sometimes walk. I sometimes take the subway. I also have a car, but when I can, I love to ride the bike. It's the most fun and often the fastest way to get around the city. So, in the time that I've been here, cycling in this city has gone from being a really uncommon and kind of maverick activity to something that's quite mainstream. And that's been fun to watch that unfolding. But I think we still have a long way to go as far as being really truly world class with our infrastructure. I'm somebody that travels a lot for work, so I see what really great urban infrastructure can look like. And in New York, we're like halfway there, but we're not all the way there. And so I thought it would be interesting to find out more about this, how decisions are made. And I was sort of searching for a specific story to follow, and this McGuinness Boulevard story. It's about 5 miles from where I live, sort of presented itself and grabbed my attention as a particular sort of case study to follow. McGuinness is a particularly dangerous street that was created in the 1950s to connect a couple of highways. Had been a small street that had been widened a lot and going through a residential neighborhood. And the result, predictably, was a lot of car crashes in which many people were hurt and killed over a long period of time. So I followed for about 3 years the effort to do something about this to make it a safer street for everyone.
As someone who is documenting urban conflict, how would you personally define like a good city or a good designed city?
I'm not an urban planner and or an academic. I'm just really a citizen. So I don't want to sort of speak too broadly, but my focus on this movie was really again about streets and particularly, well, largely the balance of cars on streets with other modes of using the streets, which these days could be pedestrians, bikes, e-bikes. I think in this specific area that good infrastructure makes the street safe for all users. Bad infrastructure prioritizes one mode of transportation over all the others and makes it dangerous to do anything other. Like in America in general, our streets have for about 100 years really been dominated by the automobile, and every other use of the street was not really taken seriously. And even though people have continued to bike and walk and do all sorts of things, often it was inconvenient or even dangerous to do so. So yeah, I consider a better design one that sort of accommodates all the different sort of purposes, all the different uses that people would like to do.
So since you experience the city in, maneuvering the city in all different types of ways, being a cyclist, being a driver, and walking, how did that shape the way you told the story now?
Well, it is interesting. I do think that your perspective, well, there's something, for instance, called windshield perspective, which is that people that only drive tend to not really think about, people on bikes or whatever. And it's true. Unless you're doing the activity, it's hard to really have a feeling for it. I think because I've been using all of these modes of transportation, maybe I had maybe more sensitivity than a lot of people would to the different uses. One particular idea I had with this film was to try to make the whole movie without using the van that I usually use for work to move cameras around and whatnot. So I actually kind of challenged myself to see if I could make it basically just getting around on my bicycle, which I did. I bought a little trailer for the bicycle and I would bring my camera equipment with me to the different shoots. So it was a kind of a fun challenge to see if it could be done. And in fact, it can be done. And again, the street I was focusing on is only about 5 miles from where I live, so it wasn't like terribly far. But yeah, that was sort of a fun challenge that I set for myself, to show you can do a lot. A lot of the arguments. Well, anyway, most New Yorkers don't even have a car. The truth be told, so people are somehow going about their life without cars. And since most people are doing that, it seems to me that it's only fair that the street accommodates like actually most people and not the minority that's getting around in these big vehicles. At the same time, I think there's absolutely a place for cars. It's just it shouldn't get sort of precedence over every other mode of transportation, particularly when the result of that precedence is injuries and death, which is what we've had a lot of.
In this documentary or film, it occurs in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, New York, right?
Correct.
I when I did my research, I seen that it has gone through some significant transformation and also gentrification. So,
Yeah.
how present would you say was the tension during this film?
Yeah, there's a lot of tension. Besides wanting to make a movie about transportation, I wanted to make a movie about politics, which I think this is, and particularly, as you probably have heard, in America right now, we're having big political problems. I feel that democracy to function well, it's all about compromise, and I feel like a street is a good illustration of compromise. How are you going to use this limited space for all different people? How are you going to make a reasonable compromise to give the best opportunities to most people? And unfortunately, the fights over the streets largely aren't between parties willing to compromise. It's people yelling at each other saying only my way of doing it is correct and everybody else I don't care about. I saw a lot of that kind of behavior, a lot of that sort of screaming at each other, lack of willingness to give and take, which is really what I think is really necessary for a democracy to work well. And I think in a certain way this story of just one street in one city in America tells us something about failures in our bigger politics, that we seem to be having a great deal of trouble treating each other respectfully, again, willing to give a little, take a little, the sort of bargains that really are necessary in a healthy society.
This film, it also highlights how ordinary people or citizens can, come together and then influence urban policies. Did this project in a way restore or challenge your faith and civic participations when coming to matters of, making change at a you say grassroots level or at a lower level, not having
Yeah.
any for lack of a better word, I would say leadership position?
I mean, I was surprised that that the story I was following actually did come to a positive conclusion, in that the people in the community that were really fighting for change, and I can tell you this change would not have happened without those people fighting for it. The government was not just going to deliver it. It's very clear the government was just going to let the status quo go on forever. So in a way, this is a hopeful story and gave me some hope that if citizens really want something and really work really hard and really long for it, they can get it. And in this case, they did. I don't want to give away every twist and turn in the movie. And most of the time I was making this movie, I was not optimistic. I didn't think that positive change was going to happen. So that kind of came as a very pleasant surprise for me in the sort of third year of making this movie, that suddenly events changed in a way that allowed the changes to finally happen. But I'll add, this street was created about 70 years ago. And from the very beginning, it was dangerous, and from the very beginning people were fighting for change, and it took 70 years to make the change happen. And in a way, it only happened because in 2021 a local school teacher, was killed crossing the street, and that really galvanized the community. So it's really a tragedy that sort of begins to allow something to happen. And as you noted, it's also a bit of, I think, a story about gentrification. This neighborhood has traditionally been a working class kind of immigrant community that is not very politically engaged. And I think as a result, this is one of the reasons why they had to put up with such bad conditions for so long. And only in the last couple decades is it getting wealthier. I think people that are more, more politically engaged and maybe have a little more leisure time to devote to something like this, sort of, I think, is another one of the reasons why the change finally happened now. So in a way, it could be seen as maybe a positive aspect of gentrification, which is often shown portrayed as just a bad thing. It's clearly a mixed thing. And a lot of the fighting in the community was between the newer, perhaps more affluent people and the older community that had been there for a long time, and just and didn't like the idea that new people were coming and just changing everything.
As I know, as artists, as filmmakers, as designers, we have such power to shape, like, perception. So how important and how intentional was it that you passed the message that you wanted to pass through this film?
Yeah, well, I think the reason to make a movie like this is to hopefully have an effect on, and I do think one of the problems with our politics is that people aren't very well educated on the issues that they're fighting. People very quickly form opinions. Often it's just because that's what their peer group, that's sort of just a popular opinion in the peer group, but they might not actually know very much about the specific issues involved. And I think street design is one of those things. People just make a lot of assumptions that often aren't correct. Like they think, oh, if you're taking away lanes for cars, the traffic is just going to get terrible. That's a very common assumption. Kind of makes sense, but it's wrong. And so I think my hope is that documentary is one way that you can help inform people so that they can make better decisions. Both learning a little bit about urban planning, which is it's a complex subject. It's not something that you can just figure out by snapping your finger and suddenly you're an expert and have a great opinion about it. So I hope the movie tells a bit about urban planning, tells a bit about history, which also people don't really know. Like, I think people assume, oh, the way the street is now is the way it's always been, and we can't possibly change it. But if you actually look at history, you see, oh, this street used to have horses on it. This street used to have a streetcar. This street used to be just 2 lanes. It was only expanded to 4 lanes, in the mid 20th century. Like, these things have changed a lot over time. And I think if people start to appreciate that, they can say, oh, maybe it can change again, or maybe what's worked 50 years ago is no longer optimal because now we have like e-bikes and we have all these new things on the road. And so I'm just trying to sort of open up people's mind about the possibilities, also to understand a little bit about what's happening in other parts of the world, because again, we have lots of examples in all kinds of cities of different ways of organizing the streets. And unfortunately for America, the way we're doing it now is, in general, I go into the statistics in the movie. It's much more dangerous than what we see in a lot of, for instance, European cities or Japanese cities. Like, much more dangerous. Like, we're having about 4 times as much injuries and deaths on our streets as those cities. I think if people start to understand this, they might make different choices.
Maybe someone would argue that, development in the line of wanting to enrich yourself in one way or the other. For example, if we are saying we are developing something, right? Does it benefit the people who are there, or is it for the pockets of the minority? So maybe the argument could be somewhere in between there, that sometimes what is done not entirely because for the purposes of the masses, but for just,
I concur. I mean, I think that if we're going to talk about American urban transportation, we can generalize and say that a lot of the decisions that were made were not good for the people in these communities. Really, the dominance of the automobile in America, to the exclusion of like good transit and good pedestrian spaces and all, was a bad bargain. For the average person in the city that might not even have a car. They end up in a dangerous, polluted, unpleasant place where it's hard to get around. I think, and again, I'm not a historian, but it seems fairly clear to me that the reason that we ended up with what we got was because it was great for oil companies, it was great for car companies, it was great for corporate America, which is very politically powerful, but generally not great for just the average person living in cities. The car is an amazing invention, and in some cases it's wonderful, but it doesn't really work well in dense urban environments. There's just not enough space for all of these big metal boxes. It just doesn't work. So there has to be, if you're really taking it seriously of how to serve the people in a dense urban environment, cars are never going to be the solution. You have to be looking at other modes of transportation.
I suppose that's where the overlap in cinematography and urbanism comes in, where you get to tell stories like this, to at least try influence decisions that are being made for a better change. So how would you now say you have captured the emotional life of the infrastructure? something that people usually see as purely functional. For example, when you look at the streets, you're not looking from that point of, this is life. This is, you are looking from someone is looking from a point of, okay, yeah, it functions, we can move around and everything. How did you manage to capture the emotional life of the infrastructure?
Well, I think that stories, what really are about people, infrastructure, the way you make it an emotional story is that you talk about the people that use the infrastructure. You don't just, if I just talked about the streets and didn't talk about people, that would be like a class lesson or something like that. But if we want to, and I do think what affects people more deeply often is an emotional human story. So I think by spending time with some of the activists who, and politicians who are fighting for change, and also spending time with the people that are against it and seeing how passionate they are, and seeing these groups fighting, like really seeing them in heated arguments. And all, I do think it's a drama. And I think that is to some extent how, for better or for worse, that's, I think, more likely often to affect people than just cold hard facts. Yeah, and I think that's something that film is particularly well suited to doing, is to show people that.
I believe this required a certain level of patience from you, because you say the story was, developing as this thing was happening. So how was the evolving nature of the whole story influence your own creative process as a filmmaker?
Yeah, well, I've worked on enough documentaries to know that it's a marathon. You don't. It's something you have to be patient. Again, this movie I worked on for about 3 years, which is a long time, but not unusual for documentary. The horrible thing about it, because you, on the one hand, you don't know what you're getting, and it might amount to nothing or not. But also, as happened here, sometimes wonderful surprises happen. So again, without going into the details, this story I was following really took some really interesting twists and turns and involved some really wonderful people, I think, who were entertaining and enlightening to follow. And some of that was, I guess, just that I had a good instinct that I just had a feeling that this was going to be a good story. I probably shot about 100 hours, which again is not unusual for a documentary, but considering the final movie is 75 minutes, you can see that's a lot of work both to shoot and then to edit. And I want to give a lot of credit to my editing partner in this project, a woman named Kristen Bai, who I really give like half the credit for helping shape the material into something that can be digestible and entertaining, because it's a big job. It's a big job.
To someone who is going to always looking forward to watch Changing Lanes, what would you say, without giving too much, what would you say is the soul of the film?
I have to think about that one a bit. You could answer that a few different ways. I would just say, to me, that it's both a very specific local story about this one street, but that it also, I do think, is a microcosm for big themes of questions about change and progress, and what allows it to happen and what impedes it. I don't have all the answers by a long shot, but I think it's very interesting to ask those questions. And like particularly at this moment in America, where we seem to be having really big problems. Politics always has an ugly side, but I do think in our history there were times when we made enormous strides forwards, and big progress as far as improving people's lives, like most people's lives. And now we seem to be having a lot of trouble doing that, and it seems like things have become very I don't know, there's much more of a just suspicion of each other, and a lot of sense of a zero-sum game, like an unwillingness to try anything new. And I don't know that answers your question about the soul of America, but anyway, which is all to say, or the soul of the movie rather, but my goal was to tell a specific story that also has these sort of broader implications. And based on what I'm hearing from audiences, I think that it's working in that way.
You would think it's only happening in that street, but when you look at the broader picture of it, in so many places around the world, urban spaces are quite designed or developed in such manner that when you look back at it, you see that, but these things are not working. They're not working for the people. It's not functional for the people that are in that place. So in a way, it's a wake-up call for almost everyone around the world who's a professional in the urban planning industry, who is, a storyteller or whatever, to say, okay, but this is what we must do now. since this is happening. We shouldn't really wait for something bad to happen for change to be made in that way. The last question would be, how do you know when a documentary stops being an observation and starts becoming an intervention?
I don't know that you know that. And I think it can be both. I don't think, I will say my goal was to not make like a propaganda movie or a one-sided movie. Sometimes when I would show up and shoot, the sort of partisans on each side would say like, whose side are you on? And I would say like, I'm not on a side. I'm just trying to tell the story, And I think the best documentaries respect the intelligence of the audience to make up their own minds. I'm not trying to tell people how to think. I'm not trying to tell people that they have to drive or ride a bike or walk. People should do what they want to do. But I'm just trying to tell this particular story and let people draw their own conclusions. I think if you tell a story well, people will get it. I think people aren't. I try to respect the intelligence of an audience, and obviously I have my own point of view, but I try to go light with that and not sort of force people to see things only one way.
So, what should be a person's takeaway now from this? If I'm going to sit down and watch it from a theater somewhere, what should I walk away thinking from there? Besides me making my own conclusions about everything.
Well, yeah, I honestly don't know that I want to answer that question. I think people need to see the movie. But I think, broadly, I think people should, at the very least, should get people thinking about how things work, how things change, why you can go decades with no change, and then suddenly you can have a lot of change, and get people thinking that maybe what changes they want to see happen, and get them thinking, okay, if I want this to happen, what are maybe the steps that I should be doing to help move it forwards, rather than just being completely passive. Because I do think a lot of it just has to do with like getting organized, and really putting in the effort. And it's easy to just complain, but I think if you look at like this example, you'll see positive change happen, but it happened because people really took responsibility and did the work. So I guess that would be something I'd like people to appreciate.
I think my takeaway was that change doesn't have to be humongous or big for it to start. It can start with me. It can start with just someone. It doesn't need to be something that the bureaucracy in it doesn't need to be that much. I can be that change, no matter how small it is.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's true. I don't know that that's true. I think like in this case, you need both. You need a very engaged local people, but you also do need this government to get on board with it. And this is, I think, why change is so hard, because it's not just, you need a whole lot of different things to come together at once. And it's like a chain. If there's any weak link, it won't happen. If the mayor is weak, it won't happen. If the people in the community aren't fighting hard, it won't happen. Again, after 70 years, all the links came together in this story, and bang, we got it. And so on the one hand, yeah, it's both inspiring, but it's also, I think, kind of sobering to realize this is quite difficult, and you really need a lot of elements, and you need to really work hard. It does not come easy.
It takes a collective.
Yep.
Thank you very much for your time and joining me here today. I had like a lot of questions, but I figured maybe they're a little bit technical for you because you're not an avid planner.
Yeah, I want to be careful about, speaking about what I actually know about, and not, just because I do think that's, again, I feel like that's a lot of our problem, is people feeling that they know more than they know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.